quote Immanuel Kant when I say that an objectified person is denied humanity. Objectification in the media today is an unprecedented problem that affects each and every one of you. First, I'm going to start out with definitions of objectification, which is the treatment of someone as if they were an object, usually for the purpose of selling a good or a service. I'll also be talking about hypersexualization, which is sexuality that is inappropriately imposed through the media, typically today targeting children. Some examples of objectification. Here you see both of these images where they use the body of the model to promote the sale of the item. Here you see the objectification of Pamela Anderson for PETA to promote you to go vegetarian. That was kind of ironic. There are many problems that rise with objectification, like depression, anxiety, and distorted perceptions of reality, but I'll talk more about that later. I personally have seen many effects of self-objectification, personally, with many of my close friends and people that I do see in the media. These problems arise because people compare themselves to impossible standards, and when they feel that they do not compare, or they don't compute to these standards, they feel like they're a failure. First, I'll show you where these standards come from. So, first, someone tell me the stereotypical quality of a female.
Straight hair.
Straight hair?
Straight hair.
Oh, straight. Yeah, straight. I have here passive, emotional, independent, and slim. Now someone tell me the stereotypical qualities of a male.
Strong?
Strong, right. The exact opposite, usually, of a female. So you guys, I'm sure, all know these qualities because they have been imposed on you by our culture and by especially images within the media. As Caroline Heldman states in Sexualizing Sarah Palin, published in 2011, the media specifically encourages focus on physical appearance and mainstream gender roles rather than someone's intelligence or their ideas. Now I'll show you how these gender roles and these standards promote objectification. Michelle Valise puts it in her article, Increasing Empathy and Awareness, published in 2016, that media encourages increasingly polarized and rigid gender roles. This very narrow definition of femininity and masculinity can be seen in ads and movies such as these. This definition of femininity especially encourages girls to focus on their appearance and their sex appeal. They learn at a very young age that their value is determined based on their beauty rather than their intelligence. And boys have a very similar narrow definition of masculinity that promotes insensitivity, and macho behavior. They are taught to judge girls based on how close they come to an impossible, artificial, and shallow ideal. This is one of the reasons we have such a prevalent presence of rape culture in our society, because this lack of empathy and fewer emotions that are imposed onto men in the media come directly from these gender roles. In her article, The Objectification of Women in Mass Media, Stephanie Berberg discusses how the media is directly linked to the alteration of physical appearance, typically within females. Here we see the statistics from 2000 and 2009, an incredibly high rate of increase in beautification surgeries, like breast augmentation and butt lifts. While these problems may be obvious to many of us, there are many aspects that people fail to realize. As David Levin demonstrates in his article, So Sexy, So Soon, published in 2008, hypersexualization today especially targets children. With brands and companies like Disney and Barbie, we see characters that are dressed in scandalous clothing and have impossible body types. We also see parents that are encouraging their children to dress in outfits that are increasingly sexualized, like collars and tiaras. You see these, sometimes children as young as 2 years old, performing sexualized acts and dressed in outfits like the prostitute from Pretty Woman. The media especially imprints impossible standards into our minds, and these have very real consequences. Steve Logan's journal titled Objectification Leads to Depersonalization states how self-objectification directly leads to depression, self-harm, and anxiety. And we see this with the increasing rate of mental health disorders that have been on the rise since the 1940s. And he claims it's directly linked to objectification and hypersexualization within the media. I personally think that the scariest part of objectification is the effect that it has on our politics and our government. This pattern of objectification encourages demonizing, sexualizing, and dismissive comments from media outlets. Like we see here, Hillary Clinton is targeted for not wearing makeup instead of what's coming out of her mouth and her ideas. In an analysis of the political effects of objectification, Michael Cahill finds in his study that there is a tendency for self-objectified women to view themselves with less political efficacy. This means that there are fewer women that feel they are competent enough to vote, so there are fewer women going out to vote and voicing their opinions. That means there's also fewer women that are trying out for these political positions and being elected into office. And we see this here by the disparity of women today in Congress versus the amount of men that are in Congress. This promotes ideas that primarily benefit men in our society, and this is not accurate because we have such an equal amount of men and women. While there has been a lot of recent change with the Me Too movement, the women's marches, and the increase of women in our government from the recent election, there's still an obvious need for improvement. We need to do this by challenging gender norms and telling children, especially, that they are not defined, their self-worth is not defined by how beautiful they are. It should instead be defined by how intelligent they feel they are, how they feel performing in athletic competitions. We need to tell children not to ostracize other kids that don't fit into these perfect gender roles. We need to boycott companies that do objectify women so blatantly. As Elizabeth Daniel states in her journal, replacing skinny and sexy with strong and powerful, it's, quote, "It is necessary for girls and women to see women in varied roles, so they can envision themselves in these roles." If young girls don't see themselves in positions where they are strong and powerful and athletic, and they don't see themselves as intelligent, as scientists, as engineers, and similarly as if men don't see themselves in compassionate and empathetic roles, we'll never have this change that we need to restore humanity in those objectifying themselves in the media and those objectifying themselves in general.